Been a big year in politics. A lot has been made of the most important political issues for the public. Are the politicians listening? Are they reflecting your concerns? GovConnex, that's a Sydney-founded company that does partner with Sky News on our election coverage. It's released its second annual Political Trends report. It measures what politicians and their parties spoke about most in 2023. Joining me now is GovConnex UK Managing Director William Wright. Thank you for your time as ever. So no big surprise, cost of living, the number one topic. And this was across the political divide. Everyone agreed on this being an issue.
Exactly, Tom. Thanks for having me again. Good to see you and good morning. First, I think it's important to premise it by saying what we mean by mentions. So this is anything that a federal politician has said in the chambers, in Parliament, what they've said on social media, so Twitter, Facebook, X, or in press releases. And it lines up pretty well. And Senator Hume basically nailed it. She was speaking about cost of living a lot. It's been the number one most mentioned issue, so 10,000 mentions there. Housing, number two. Obviously, the first referendum we had in more than 25 years for the Voice, that came in at number three. War in Ukraine and Israel and Palestine at number four, and then climate change at number five. So last year, floods were the most mentioned issue in 2022. You also had vaccines significantly up there, but it's really cost of living and inflation that are leading the way.
So interesting, because both sides have talked about it, the major parties, but it's a lot harder to actually do something about in government. It's a bit ethereal, and we saw Labor dominate mentions when they were in opposition and then take their foot off the accelerator when they became government.
Yeah, so cost of living is always going to play to the opposition's strengths. It's the exact same situation in the UK. If we look to before the 2022 election, in May 2022, we look at mentions of cost of living. 71% of those were by the then Labor opposition. Since that election, only 46% of the mentions have come from Labor. Same story with interest rates. 58% of mentions this year on interest rates have come from the coalition. 101 of those from Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor. Only 36% of those have come from the government in Labor. So really not too much of a surprise there.
Yeah, so we see that basically flip. Now, the Gaza conflict, the debate on this is all around not Palestine, not Hamas, but Israel.
Yeah, so it's obviously been the biggest issue globally. The continued war in the Middle East, the continued war in Ukraine as well. Mentions of Israel, almost 1,500 mentions in Australian federal parliament this year. Only 414 mentions of Palestine, 37% of them coming from the Greens. Obviously, they're a much smaller number of the House of Reps and Senate, but really leading the way on mentions. Only 25% have come from the coalition. Marine Faruqi's been the most vocal on Palestine, and Foreign Minister Penny Wong's been the most vocal on Israel. Exact same story in the UK as well. 3,500 more mentions in Westminster on Israel than Palestine.
Our COVID vaccine rates are way down. There's the odd warning, but politicians have read the room, I think. They're not bothering to talk about this much, Will. They're also not maybe wanting to talk about another certain issue to do with airlines.
Yeah, exactly. So I think silence is always the loudest sound, right? And it's the exact same thing here. COVID, if you backtrack to 2020, there were nearly 15,000 mentions in Australian federal parliament of COVID, only 1,000 this year. As we mentioned before, vaccine mentions have dropped off. And airline lounges is the interesting one. So there's obviously a lot of media attention on the Chairman's Club and the Virgin Club this year. But aside from a couple of Senate hearings, there were essentially no mentions of the Chairman's Club in Australian federal politics. And look, Tom, I'm going away for Christmas tomorrow. So if any airline wants to invite me into the Concorde Lounge at Heathrow, I'll shut up too.
The Concorde Lounge. Gee, all right. Good luck with that. It's good to know you've got a price, Will, and that's basically nothing. We know politicians like to sort of pretend they've got their finger on the button. They're up with the kids or the the issues of the day. What's cool, what's not? What are they trying to get some street cred with this year?
Yeah, there's a bit of Taylor mania down in Canberra. It's not Angus Taylor mania. Taylor Swift. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has been the most vocal on Taylor Swift. 9 mentions this year. There was also a bit of a cinematic revival in Hollywood this year. We saw the films Oppenheimer and Barbie. They're politicians, not film critics. 56 mentions of Barbie, only 6 mentions of Oppenheimer. In terms of sport as well, and the Matildas, great result. They obviously took the nation on an incredible ride back in the Women's World Cup earlier this year, and they were the most mentioned sports team of 2023. Sam Kerr was the most mentioned athlete. And the last one, Tom, the AFL Grand Final. Obviously, I think if you were to pick the most vocal person that works in Parliament House on the Brisbane Lions, it would have been you, Tom. Unfortunately, didn't quite get the job done. So it was the Collingwood Magpies, and it was Senator Ciccone who was the most vocal on the Pies with 14 mentions.
Yeah, look, good on someone for wearing their heart on their sleeves. I wonder if the mentions were all before or after the grand final. When it only comes after, that's when I get a bit cynical. Got to sort of nail your colours to the mast, I think. 94 mentions of Sam Kerr, one person. That must have stood out when you're looking at particular mentions. I mean, she's, one of the very best players in the world. And I guess in the general media, the mentions were ramped up by that injury during the World Cup. But 94 by politicians is pretty incredible.
Yeah, because politicians want to get onto a bandwagon. I mean, she's just as much of a celebrity here in London because she plays for Chelsea, who obviously a huge team in the women's league here is skyrocketing popularity as well. So very similar story in both jurisdictions.
All right, William Wright, breaking down what the politicians are and are not talking about in 2023. Look forward to working with you again next year. Enjoy your break.